Breaking news! Princess Anne has dramatically intervened in Britain's deepening constitutional crisis with the Labour government, royal rebellion escalating. At 11:43 a.m. today, the Princess Royal abruptly cancelled scheduled appearances and arrived unannounced at the Palace of Westminster for emergency constitutional talks. Eyewitnesses described her as visibly determined as she entered Parliament's private chambers. Senior officials clearing corridors, security details doubled, Anne reportedly hand-delivering sealed documents from King Charles directly to the Lord Chancellor, and within minutes, something unprecedented happened that sent shockwaves through the entire British establishment. Anne publicly declared, "The Crown has constitutional obligations that transcend party politics. Those obligations will be upheld." Government ministers left ashen-faced. Opposition leaders summoned for urgent briefings. Constitutional experts warning of the most serious confrontation between monarchy and government in modern British history, and most shocking of all, leaked palace documents revealing Charles is considering using reserve powers not exercised since the 19th century. If you want to understand how this extraordinary royal intervention could collapse Starmer's government within hours, hit that subscribe button now because events are accelerating by the minute. Here's what triggered this extraordinary royal escalation. For weeks, growing constitutional tensions have simmered between Buckingham Palace and Downing Street over controversial legislation. Not routine policy disagreements, not typical political disputes. Fundamental constitutional concerns about the separation of powers and democratic safeguards. The government's judicial reform bill would give ministers unprecedented powers to overturn court judgments they disagree with. The Parliamentary Procedures Act would drastically limit scrutiny of executive decisions. The Expanded Official Secrets Act would criminalise journalists publishing information damaging to ministerial reputation, each measure individually concerning. Together, representing what constitutional scholars call executive power concentration that threatens Britain's democratic balance. The King, constitutionally obligated to remain politically neutral, has reportedly expressed private concerns through established channels. Royal sources reveal Charles repeatedly requested clarification on how these measures align with constitutional norms. But government responses have been increasingly dismissive, with one minister allegedly telling palace officials, "The King should stick to garden parties and leave governing to those elected to govern." This dismissal of legitimate constitutional concerns apparently triggered mounting alarm within the royal household. What began as private constitutional dialogue has now erupted into public constitutional confrontation, with Princess Anne respected for her formidable intellect and dedication to duty, taking an unprecedented public role in defending the monarchy's constitutional position. The extraordinary events inside Parliament have left constitutional experts and political observers stunned. Princess Anne's arrival wasn't just unusual, it was meticulously choreographed for maximum constitutional impact. She entered through the sovereign's entrance, a route reserved for the monarch during the state opening of Parliament. She was accompanied not by regular staff, but by senior officials, including the Clerk of the Crown in Chancery and the Queen's Remembrancer, ancient offices involved in constitutional documentation. Most significantly, Anne requested a formal meeting with the Lord Chancellor, the government minister responsible for the proper functioning of courts and constitutional propriety. Sources present describe an atmosphere of extraordinary constitutional gravity as Anne presented what appeared to be formal documents bearing the royal seal. While the precise contents remain private, multiple sources confirm they related to the Crown's constitutional obligations regarding separation of powers and judicial independence. After the meeting, Anne took the unprecedented step of making a brief public statement. "The Crown has constitutional obligations that transcend party politics. Those obligations will be upheld." The carefully chosen words sent immediate shockwaves through Westminster. Former Cabinet Secretary Lord O'Donnell appeared on BBC News explaining the extraordinary significance. These aren't casual comments. This is the royal family explicitly invoking their constitutional role as guardian of proper democratic process. The reference to obligations rather than concerns signals this goes beyond opinion. The palace is indicating potential constitutional action. Legal and constitutional experts are already discussing whether the documents might contain formal constitutional warnings about royal assent the monarch's approval required for bills to become law. This isn't royal opinion. This is potential constitutional confrontation at the highest level. The government's response was immediate and panicked. Within minutes of Anne's statement, cabinet ministers were summoned to an emergency virtual meeting, not routine consultation, not scheduled discussion, crisis management with ministers interrupted during constituency visits and family commitments. Government sources describe the atmosphere as constitutional emergency territory. Cabinet Secretary Simon Case reportedly told ministers the situation represented the most serious challenge to executive authority from the Crown in modern British history. Most telling was the government's initial public response, a hastily arranged press conference where a visibly uncomfortable Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood attempted to downplay constitutional concerns. The government maintains constructive dialogue with the palace on all constitutional matters. Proper separation of powers remains central to our democracy. When directly questioned about Anne's specific statement regarding constitutional obligations, Mahmood gave the most revealing non-answer. Individual statements should be viewed in broader context rather than isolation. Not denial, not substantive response. Just evasion while constitutional crisis deepens. By afternoon, ministers had been instructed to cancel all media appearances, a sure sign of government in full defensive crisis mode. Attempts to contact Downing Street press office were met with no comment at this time. Responses extraordinary for a government normally quick to shape narratives. One Whitehall insider described the mood. This isn't just another political problem to manage. When the monarchy invokes constitutional obligations, there's no communication strategy that can simply make this disappear. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens reacted with a mixture of confusion, concern, and growing support for the royal position. Margaret Wilson, a 74-year-old retired civil servant from Leeds, told regional reporters, "I've never been particularly royalist, but someone needs to stand up for proper democratic process. If the government is trying to override courts and limit parliamentary scrutiny, thank goodness someone has the courage to say no." James Thompson, a history teacher from Cardiff, expressed similar sentiments. "This isn't about politics or party. This is about maintaining the constitutional balances that protect our democracy. The monarchy exists partly as a final constitutional safeguard, and that's exactly the role they appear to be fulfilling." Social media exploded with supportive hashtags, including #Royal Constitutional Duty and #Crown Defends Democracy, both trending nationwide within hours. Constitutional law professors reported unprecedented public interest in lectures and explanatory articles about royal prerogatives and reserve powers. While ordinary citizens engage seriously with these profound constitutional questions, government officials remain focused solely on damage limitation and power preservation. The contrast is so stark, so revealing, that even traditional Labour supporters expressed understanding for the royal position. Former Labour Lord Chancellor Lord Falconer struck a balanced tone on Radio 4. "While I believe in parliamentary sovereignty, I also believe in proper constitutional process and separation of powers. If legislation genuinely threatens these foundations, constitutional alarm bells should ring regardless of political alignment. This isn't politics anymore. This is a nation grappling with fundamental questions about democratic safeguards." Polls conducted throughout the day show 64% of respondents supporting royal intervention if democratic checks and balances are threatened, including 51% of Labour voters. The damage isn't just political, it's a profound shift in how citizens view constitutional protections in modern Britain. But then something extraordinary happened that sent shockwaves through the entire British establishment. At precisely 4:30 p.m, multiple major news organisations simultaneously received a leaked document that appeared to be internal palace legal advice regarding the Crown's constitutional options. Not vague guidance, not general principles. Detailed constitutional analysis of the monarch's reserve powers when fundamental democratic norms appear threatened. The 17-page document, apparently prepared by senior constitutional experts for the King, methodically outlines the historical precedents and legal authorities supporting royal intervention in extraordinary constitutional circumstances. Most significantly, it specifically references Section 1(1) of the Royal Assent Act of 1967, noting, "While royal assent has not been refused since 1708, This constitutional power remains legally intact when legislation fundamentally threatens constitutional balance or democratic safeguards. The document emphasizes that such powers would only be considered in the most exceptional circumstances where normal constitutional processes have failed to protect fundamental democratic principles. Most tellingly, it includes a section titled Constitutional Thresholds for Consideration of Reserve Powers, with specific reference to judicial independence, parliamentary scrutiny, and freedom of the press, precisely the areas implicated in the government's controversial legislation. Palace officials neither confirmed nor denied the document's authenticity, stating only that constitutional matters between the sovereign and government remain private. But multiple constitutional experts who reviewed the document confirmed its legal reasoning appeared professionally sound and consistent with established constitutional scholarship. Former Supreme Court Justice Lord Sumption described the document as a serious constitutional warning, not a political gesture, on Channel 4 News. This appears to be the palace methodically establishing the constitutional basis for potential intervention if democratic fundamentals are genuinely threatened. The very existence of such a document signals extraordinary concern about current legislative directions. The international reaction was swift and deeply concerning for Britain's democratic reputation. Within hours, editorial boards at major international newspapers published analyses questioning Britain's democratic stability. The Washington Post ran the headline, Constitutional Crisis. British monarchy invokes reserve powers against government overreach. The New York Times asked, is Britain's democracy in danger? The royal family apparently thinks so. The Council of Europe's Venice Commission, which monitors democratic standards, announced it was monitoring the UK situation with concern, particularly regarding judicial independence protections. International investment banks issued client guidance discussing heightened UK political risk and governance uncertainty affecting investment outlook. Most damaging was the statement from Freedom House, which monitors democratic health globally, expressing concern about potential democratic backsliding in the United Kingdom, particularly regarding separation of powers and judicial independence. The international reputation damage wasn't just symbolic, it had real diplomatic implications. Commonwealth nations, which recognized the same monarch as head of state, requested urgent briefings on the constitutional situation. European allies postponed certain joint initiatives pending clarification of UK governance stability. As former Foreign Office Permanent Secretary Sir Simon MacDonald noted on Channel 4 News, Britain's international influence derives partly from our reputation for stable, balanced constitutional governance. When that reputation is questioned, particularly when our own head of state appears to question it, our diplomatic standing suffers immediate damage. Inside Westminster, total paralysis has gripped Starmer's government. Cabinet unity has completely collapsed, with ministers now openly divided between those demanding the legislation proceed unchanged and those urging compromise with constitutional concerns. Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood, responsible for the Judicial Reform Bill, reportedly had a heated exchange with Attorney General Charlie Falconer over the constitutional implications. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner is described as deeply concerned about potential constitutional confrontation, directly requesting substantial revisions to the controversial bills. Most significantly, Cabinet Office officials have activated the Constitutional Conciliation Protocol, an obscure mechanism for resolving fundamental disputes between government and monarchy that hasn't been used in modern times. Government whips report that Labour MPs are receiving unprecedented volumes of constituent correspondence expressing concern about democratic safeguards. WhatsApp groups with names like Constitutional Response and Democratic Defence have formed among backbenchers across party lines. One senior civil servant described the atmosphere as constitutional crisis territory. Ministers don't know whether to proceed with legislation, modify it substantially, or withdraw it entirely, they revealed. When the palace explicitly invokes constitutional obligations, there's no established playbook to follow. Most concerning of all, legal experts within government departments have reportedly begun qualifying their advice with constitutional reservations, effectively creating paper trails, distancing themselves from potentially problematic legislation. Former Attorney General Dominic Grieve described this situation as civil service conscience protection on World at One. When government lawyers begin formally noting constitutional concerns in their advice, they're essentially creating records showing they warned of problems. That's extraordinarily unusual and indicates deep institutional concern about current legislative directions. But here's the most explosive revelation that could deliver the final blow to Starmer's authority. Multiple sources confirm that before Princess Anne's intervention, the government received formal written communication from the palace explicitly warning that the combined effect of their legislative program raised serious constitutional concerns. According to 3 separate sources with direct knowledge, this communication sent through official channels from the King's private secretary to the Cabinet Secretary specifically cautioned. His Majesty feels obligated to seek formal constitutional assurances regarding the preservation of judicial independence, parliamentary scrutiny, and press freedom before the legislative program proceeds further. Most significantly, the letter reportedly requested formal government response addressing specific constitutional questions about each controversial bill. According to sources, the government's response was procedurally correct but substantively dismissive, essentially asserting that constitutional concerns were unwarranted and royal input on such matters was inappropriate. If these accounts are accurate, and multiple senior sources confirm they are, they reveal the current crisis wasn't sudden escalation but the culmination of ignored constitutional dialogue. Think about what that means. Not misunderstanding, not miscommunication, deliberate dismissal of formal constitutional concerns raised through proper channels by the head of state. When asked directly about this correspondence, a Cabinet Office spokesperson gave an answer that effectively confirmed its existence. Communications between the palace and government on matters of state remain confidential but are always given appropriate consideration. Appropriate consideration? When constitutional warnings were apparently dismissed, former Cabinet Secretary Lord Butler explained the extraordinary significance on Newsnight. If the palace raised formal constitutional concerns through proper channels, and those concerns were essentially dismissed without substantive engagement, that potentially represents a fundamental breakdown in proper constitutional process. In our system, the government and monarchy both have constitutional responsibilities that require mutual respect and proper dialogue. Meanwhile, opposition leader Rishi Sunak is orchestrating a masterful parliamentary response that further isolates Starmer. Instead of partisan attacks, Sunak convened cross-party talks focused on constitutional safeguards and democratic principles. Standing alongside representatives from Liberal Democrats, Greens and regional parties outside Parliament, Sunak struck exactly the right tone. This transcends normal politics. When concerns about fundamental democratic safeguards are raised from across our constitutional system, all parliamentarians have a duty to consider them seriously. He announced an unprecedented democratic safeguards accord, committing signatories to uphold judicial independence, parliamentary scrutiny, and press freedom regardless of political alignment. The document has already secured signatures from over 200 MPs, including at least 34 Labour backbenchers, an extraordinary rebellion against the government's legislative programme. The contrast couldn't be more devastating for Starmer. While the Prime Minister faces constitutional crisis, Sunak presents as democratic statesman. While government legislation raises royal concern, Sunak builds constitutional consensus. The political implications are seismic. Conservative polling has surged to 38%, with Labour falling to 31%. But beyond polling, the more profound shift is in democratic credibility. As respected constitutional scholar Professor Vernon Bogdanor observed on Politics Live, we're witnessing a remarkable realignment where the Conservative opposition is positioning as defender of constitutional balances, while Labour is perceived as centralising power, the complete opposite of traditional political alignment. With each passing hour of inadequate government response, this perception deepens. The next 24 hours are absolutely critical for Britain's constitutional stability. The Privy Council's senior advisers to the monarch has been summoned to an emergency meeting at Buckingham Palace tomorrow morning, a step not taken outside routine business in decades. Parliamentary business committees are meeting to consider suspending progress on the controversial bills pending constitutional review. Senior judges have requested urgent clarification from government regarding judicial independence protections. Former prime ministers from both major parties have offered to mediate constitutional dialogue between palace and government. The Cabinet. Office Constitution Group's senior civil servants responsible for maintaining constitutional propriety have been meeting continuously since Princess Anne's intervention. International constitutional experts have been consulted about comparable situations in other parliamentary monarchies. BBC programming has been extensively revised to provide constitutional analysis of what they're now calling Britain's royal constitutional stand. This isn't just Westminster political drama anymore. This is a fundamental question about whether Britain's unwritten constitution can withstand current pressures upon it. As Professor Robert Hazell, constitutional expert from University College London, explained on Channel 4, Britain's constitution works through shared understanding of proper boundaries and mutual institutional respect. When government appears to push constitutional boundaries regarding fundamental democratic safeguards, and the monarchy feels obligated to invoke its constitutional a role as guardian of those safeguards, we're in genuinely unprecedented territory. At the epicenter stands Keir Starmer, a prime minister who, according to former Supreme Court President Lord Neuberger, now faces the most serious constitutional challenge to executive authority since the monarchy's modern constitutional role was established. So here's the question that matters. Is the monarchy right to invoke its constitutional obligations when democratic safeguards appear threatened? Should Starmer withdraw controversial legislation or risk unprecedented constitutional confrontation? And has the relationship between monarchy and government been permanently altered? What do you think? Is Britain facing genuine democratic backsliding that justifies royal intervention? Or should elected governments always prevail regardless of constitutional concerns? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story shocked you as much as it shocked us, share it with everyone who needs to understand this extraordinary constitutional moment. The mainstream media won't tell you the full implications of the monarchy asserting its guardian role over democratic fundamentals, but we will. And tomorrow, we'll reveal what senior constitutional experts told the palace before today's intervention conversations that expose exactly how serious the monarchy considers current threats to Britain's democratic foundations. This isn't just about one government or one royal intervention. It's about whether Britain's constitution contains effective safeguards against executive overreach, and who ultimately upholds those safeguards when normal processes appear insufficient. The answer will shape Britain's governance for generations to come.